The first thing the Vron fleet did when it dropped out of faster-than-light travel was nothing. That was the point. 4,200 warships held their positions at the edge of the Sol system and did not fire, did not advance, did not hail. They simply existed in the dark between stars, and their existence alone was the message. Fleet Master Gret watched his own formation on the tactical display and felt something close to satisfaction. The arrangement was clean. Firepower distributed across 4 flanks. Every approach angle to the human home system covered. He had done this 11 times in his career, arrived at a species border with overwhelming force and let the math do its work. The math never failed. Numbers this large did not require speeches. He gave the signal. The broadcast went out on every frequency humans used. The message was short. Earth had 24 hours to transmit a formal surrender, stand down all military assets, and open its orbital platforms to Vron inspection teams. In return, the population would be retained as a labor class under Vron governance. Resources of the system would transfer to Dominion control in an orderly way. Gret did not expect a response before the deadline. Species in this position usually spent the first hours in internal argument. That was fine. He had time. On the Galactic Council relay station, High Consul Drev received the broadcast at the same moment Earth did. He forwarded it to the full Council feed without comment. Within minutes, 16 species were watching in real time. Several sent quiet messages to Drev. The wording varied, but the meaning was the same. How long do you think before they break? Drev did not reply. He had met humans twice in a diplomatic context. Both times they had listened more than they spoke. He was not sure what to make of that. He watched the Sol system on his display and waited. The humans spent 18 hours doing things Vron sensors could not fully read. Energy output from several orbital platforms spiked briefly and returned to baseline. Small vessels moved between positions in the inner system. Deep-range signals left the system in multiple directions. Human embassies on neutral stations being informed, most likely. Then the signals stopped. At hour 22, the single response came from Earth Command. It was not a surrender document. It was a short audio transmission, no video, no formal header. The voice on the recording was level and unhurried. It said, "Request acknowledged. We are sending a representative." Gret read the translation twice. He asked his communications officer if there was a second part to the transmission. There was not. He decided it was a stalling technique. Species sometimes tried to open negotiations when they had no real leverage, hopping to delay bombardment while some internal faction argued for a different outcome. He would allow it. He was not in a hurry. Destroying a planet that had already begun negotiation created complications with the Council, and he preferred to keep this clean. "Tell me when the vessel departs," he said. At hour 23, the ship left Earth's orbital platform. One ship. Gret's sensor team confirmed the contact 3 separate times before anyone said it out loud. One vessel, frigate class, moving at standard approach speed toward the Vron fleet. The tactical officer looked at Gret. Gret looked at the display. The blip was very small against the scale of the formation. He thought about what a single frigate represented. Roughly 40 crew. Perhaps a few days of sustained fire from one Vron warship before its systems failed. Against the formation sitting at the edge of this system, it was not a military asset. It was a gesture. He sent the sensor data to the Council relay without annotation. Let them see it. On the relay station, High Consul Drev received the feed. He studied the single contact moving across his screen. Around him, Council observers were already exchanging messages. Some were amused. Some were baffled. One, representing a species that had capitulated to the Vron 7 years prior, simply said, "Brave fools." Drev said nothing. He kept watching the single point of light moving toward the fleet. He did not know why, but something about the image made him uneasy. On Earth, Admiral Ray stood in the command center and watched the same contact on a different screen. He had not slept in 22 hours. Beside him, a senior staff member asked quietly whether he was certain about this. Ray did not take his eyes off the display. "Captain Walsh knows what she is doing," he said. The contact kept moving, steady speed, straight heading, no deviation. Ray watched it for a long time. "She always does," he said. The scan results came back in 3 layers. Subcommander Saul read the first layer and felt nothing unusual. Standard frigate configuration, just as the external profile suggested. Weapons systems rated at roughly 1/5 the output of a Vron destroyer. Hull composite within expected human parameters. Crew biosigns reading 41 life forms, all calm. He moved to the second layer. The second layer was propulsion and power. The main drive was unremarkable. Power core output was slightly above standard for the class but within variance. He flagged it as a minor note and moved on. The third layer was communications. Saul stopped. He ran the measurement again, then a third time using a different sensor mode. The result did not change. The signal arrays on this frigate were larger than anything he had seen on a dedicated relay station. They were built into the hull in a way that was not obvious on external scans but became very clear under the right frequency analysis. The range on those arrays, if his estimates were correct, extended well beyond the boundaries of the Sol system. He wrote a formal anomaly report and brought it to Fleetmaster Gret. Gret read it in about 6 seconds. "They sent a messenger with a good antenna," he said. "File it." Saul filed it. He did not feel good about filing it. The broadcast Gret sent to the Council showed the sensor data in simple visual form. 1 Vron formation, 4,200 warships, rendered as a tight-colored block on the display. 1 human vessel, a single point approaching from the right side of the screen. The reaction on the Council feed was immediate. Message threads opened from a dozen species within minutes. Some were jokes. A representative from the Pelion Union sent a comparison image, a single insect approaching a fire, a cultural reference presumably. Gret did not respond to any of them. He did not need to. The image spoke clearly enough. High Consul Drev received all the same messages and responded to none of them. He pulled up the raw sensor data on his secondary display and looked at it for a long time. He was not a technical specialist, but he understood ship design in a general way. Something about the profile of the human vessel kept his attention. He forwarded the full sensor packet to a technical analyst on the station staff and asked for a second look. The analyst came back 20 minutes later with a short note. The signal arrays on the frigate were unusually large, probably a communications vessel, possibly carrying a diplomatic envoy with council-grade transmission capability. Drev read the note. Then he thought about something he had read once in a brief on human strategic philosophy. A human strategist quoted at length. One line had stayed with him for reasons he could never fully explain. The line was, "The most dangerous thing you can send into a room is not a weapon. It is a question the other side does not know how to answer." He set the note down and watched the human ship on his display. On the warden's bridge, Specialist Fenn pulled up the diagnostic results and read through them twice. The arrays were clean, signal integrity holding across all active nodes, passive systems nominal, everything ready. He leaned back in his seat and glanced at the viewport. The Vron fleet was visible now without magnification, a dark mass of shapes arranged in a pattern designed to feel like a wall. It did feel like a wall. Fenn acknowledged that quietly and then went back to his work. Lieutenant Das ran a minor course correction, trimming their approach angle by 2 degrees to thread a cleaner path between 2 of the outer formation clusters. He did it without being asked, without announcing it, the same way someone adjusts their grip on something heavy they have been carrying a long time. Captain Adira Walsh had not moved from the forward viewport in 40 minutes. She was not watching any screen. She was watching the fleet directly. A crew member named Wheeze, running secondary systems from a rear console, made a quiet comment about the sheer size of the formation. He was not scared. His tone was the tone of someone simply acknowledging a large amount of work. A few crew members chuckled softly. Walsh did not turn around, but the corner of her mouth moved. She had seen the formation on sensor displays dozens of times during the planning phase. She knew the numbers by heart. She had run simulations against that exact configuration for years. Looking at it now with her own eyes, across real space, she felt the same thing she always felt when a very long plan finally arrived at its moment. Ready. Gret received confirmation that the warden had entered outer communication range. "Prepare to receive their transmission," he said, settling back into his command chair. He was expecting a request for extended negotiation time. He was prepared to grant 48 hours. He could afford to be generous. The outcome was not going to change. He arranged a calm expression and waited. The human ship hailed first. Gret had expected to be the one initiating contact. He had a prepared statement. He had the correct tone arranged in his mind, firm, efficient, leaving no space for misinterpretation. He had done this before and he understood the architecture of it. Instead, the incoming signal light activated on its own, and his communications officer looked up and said, "They are calling us, sir." Gret paused for just a moment. Then he accepted the channel. The woman on the screen was in her late 40s by human appearance. Dark hair pulled back. No rank insignia visible in the current camera angle, though the bridge behind her was clearly a command deck. She was not reading from anything. Her hands were at her sides and she was looking directly into the screen. She was smiling. Gret had reviewed the intelligence on human facial expressions during his briefing. He understood the smile as a signal of social comfort. He had been told humans sometimes used it to mask stress. He decided she was masking stress. "Fleet Master," she said. Her translator feed was clean. "I am Captain Walsh of the Earth Vessel Warden. Thank you for accepting the channel." Gret kept his expression flat. "You are the representative Earth has sent." "I am." "Then present your surrender document." Walsh tilted her head slightly. "I don't have one." "Then what do you have?" "A message." Gret waited. "Deliver it," he said. Walsh said, "There is still time for you to leave." The bridge behind Gret went very quiet. Not because anyone was surprised by the boldness of it. They were all surprised, but because nobody was sure how to respond to something delivered that calmly. An insult given with heat was easy to answer. This was not heat. Gret leaned forward. "You are one ship." "Yes. I have 4,200. "I know. And your message to me is that I should leave." Walsh did not answer immediately. She seemed to genuinely be thinking about how to phrase the next thing she wanted to say. "It is not a threat," she said finally. "It is a real offer. You came here expecting a particular kind of situation. I am telling you that the situation is different from what you expect. You can leave now and we can talk about what comes next through proper channels, or we can continue this the other way." Gret studied her face. The translator was good, but he had learned over his career that faces carried things words did not. She was not performing confidence. She was not performing anything. She was simply present and she was waiting. He asked the question that had been sitting with him since the warden left Earth orbit. "Why are you smiling?" Walsh was quiet for a moment. She considered the question the way someone considers something they know the answer to but want to say correctly. "I was just thinking," she said, "about how quiet space is right before everything changes." Gret cut the channel. He sat with that for 3 seconds. Then he turned to his tactical officer. "Encirclement formation. Bring all outer wing units around their approach corridor. Do not fire. I want them contained while I authorize a demonstration strike on the outer moon." The order moved through the fleet in minutes. Hundreds of ships repositioned. From outside the formation, the movement looked like a fist closing. On the council relay, High Consul Drev watched the formation shift on his display. The technical analyst had come back to the observation deck and was standing quietly at the edge of the room. Drev did not look at him. "They are surrounding a single ship," a council delegate said. "Yes," Drev said. "With 4,000 warships." "Yes." The delegate had nothing to add to that. On the Warden, Das read the fleet's movement on sensors and reported the new positions without particular urgency. Walsh turned from the viewport and walked to the center of the bridge. She studied the tactical display for a moment. Fenn was already looking at her. "Not yet," she said. Fenn nodded. He returned to his station. His hands rested over his controls the way you rest your hands on something you will need at exactly the right moment and not before. Outside, the Vron fleet finished repositioning. The encirclement was complete. The sensor display showed the Warden as a single marker surrounded on every axis by something that made the original formation look like an opening offer. Weiss read the contact numbers out quietly at the rear console. He was not scared, but he was quiet. Walsh looked at the tactical display one last time. Then she looked at Fenn. "Mark their positions." Fenn did, carefully, the way you mark something you will need to find in the dark. The demonstration strike on the outer moon lasted 4 seconds. 4 Vron warships fired in sequence, a coordinated burst that hit the same surface point and drove a crater 40 kilometers wide into the lunar rock. The light from the impact reached the Warden's sensors at the same instant it reached Gret's viewport. He watched it without particular feeling. He had ordered this kind of strike before. It was a calibration tool. It showed what was coming if the wrong answer arrived. He hailed the Warden again. "That was Mercy," he said. "What is your answer?" Walsh looked at him across the channel. She did not look at the moon. She did not look at the sensor feed. She looked at him. "One moment," she said. She turned to her communications officer. "Send it," she said. Specialist Fenn, calm, hands already on the board, pressed a single control. Gret watched him do it. He waited for something to happen on his end. A weapon activation, a shield pulse, some kind of tactical response that would at least make sense within the framework of what he understood. Nothing happened. For 6 seconds, nothing happened at all. Then every sensor on every Vron ship in the formation triggered at once. Subcommander Saul heard the alerts from 3 stations simultaneously. He moved to the primary sensor board and looked at the incoming feed and felt something go cold in his chest. The objects were not new. That was the thing that reached him first. They were not appearing from nowhere. They were simply becoming visible. Things that had been sitting in this system, cold and utterly undetectable, were powering on. In the asteroid belt, dense clusters of rock were separating to reveal structures nested inside them. Near the outer planets, objects that had registered as old survey probes and decommissioned satellites were activating with energy signatures that matched nothing in his database. Along the debris rings of the giant planets, things that looked like industrial wreckage were extending components that had been folded flat against their hulls for what had to have been years, decades. They were everywhere, behind moons, in the dust lanes between the inner and outer system, positioned in the long, cold dark where no sensor sweep would bother looking because there had never been anything out there worth scanning. Each one had been sitting cold and still and completely invisible for a very long time. No heat signature, no electromagnetic output, no power draw above the background noise of empty space. Waiting for a specific signal from a specific source. Saul started counting contacts. He had a habit of counting under pressure. The habit had always served him well because counting established a manageable scope. He stopped at 80,000. There were more. Gret's tactical display had gone from a clean formation chart to something that looked like the stars themselves had turned hostile. Contact markers covered every sector. His outer wing commanders were reporting simultaneously, their voices overlapping in the command channel. He heard the number 60,000 from one, a different number from another. The numbers kept changing as more platforms powered on. He thought about how his fleet had arrived and taken its positions. He thought about where those positions were. The formation was surrounded on every axis, not positioned outside the formation waiting to strike, nested inside it. These objects had been here when the Vron fleet arrived. They had been here, cold and invisible, while his ships arranged themselves around them. He had not surrounded the Warden. He had placed his entire fleet inside the web, without knowing the web existed. Saul came to him with the full reading. His voice was even, his face was not. These platforms have been here for years, sir, possibly decades. The construction method, they were built in segments and assembled in place, using minimum energy output throughout the entire process. Each one has been running on passive standby with no heat signature, no electromagnetic trace. They were designed to remain invisible until they received one specific signal from one specific source. Gret looked at the Warden on the central display. One small ship, clean profile, enormous signal arrays. Not a messenger with a good antenna. A key. He thought about the smile on Walsh's face when the channel first opened. He thought about what she had said. How quiet space is right before everything changes. 31 years. Humans had watched the Vron expansion moving toward them for 31 years without making a sound, without signaling to anyone what they were doing, without once showing that they had seen anything coming. They had watched and worked and seeded their entire system with something that only came alive when the right ship sent the right signal. Saul said very quietly, "We flew into a trap, sir." Gret did not answer. He was still looking at the Warden. On the relay station, High Consul Drev watched the contact map populate in real time. The technical analyst who had flagged the signal arrays an hour ago was standing beside him now, and neither of them was saying anything. The number on the display crossed 100,000. Drev sat down. He had told himself when the Warden first left Earth's orbit, "Brave fools." He did not think that anymore. The platforms moved before they fired. That detail was what made Fleet Master Gret understand fully, without any remaining space for doubt, that he was not dealing with a standard weapons deployment. A standard deployment fired immediately. This did not. The platforms repositioned first, sliding into new coordinates with a smoothness that meant they were sharing navigation data in real time, sealing off retreat corridors one by one, while his outer wing commanders were still counting the initial contact numbers. By the time the first platform fired, every clean exit from the formation had a coverage angle waiting on the other side of it. Gret's countermeasures team responded immediately. Jamming pulses went out on the standard disruptive frequencies. Point defense systems activated across the fleet. His communications officer attempted to reach the nearest Vron response fleet, 3 light towers away, for emergency reinforcement. The signal did not leave the system. Gret looked at his communications officer. The officer shook his head. All long-range frequencies above a certain range were suppressed. Something was generating a field across the entire operational area. His fleet was cut off from the outside. The suppression had not started when the platforms activated. It had started the moment the Warden's array sent its broadcast, before a single platform had even moved. The Warden had isolated the fleet before the battle began. Saul watched combat data flow in from every engaged section and did something he had not done in his career. He stopped trying to find a counter. The platforms were networked in a way his analysis tools were not built to process. When a Vron ship deployed a jamming pulse that degraded an incoming targeting signal, every platform in range updated its approach within seconds, not just the platform being countered, but across the entire swarm simultaneously. There was no adaptation period. The system had been running simulations for years, fed by long-range observation data collected on Vron military engagements throughout the outer systems. It had already seen the Vron countermeasure playbook. It had been designed to answer each response before it was made. Every move the fleet made had already been anticipated. The Warden fired nothing. It sat at the center of the engagement zone and managed coordinates. It was not a warship. It was a spider at the center of the web, and it did not need to move to control everything attached to it. Gret lost 200 ships in the first engagement wave. Disabled, not destroyed. The platforms had firing solutions that could have removed them from existence entirely. They did not use those solutions. They targeted hull systems, engines, weapon arrays. They chose incapacitation with precision that felt deliberate, almost careful. He ordered a full retreat on 4 flanks simultaneously, pushing through gaps in the encirclement at maximum speed. The platforms shifted ahead of the retreating ships. They did not pursue. They sealed the exit points before the retreating wings could reach them and directed them back toward the center of the formation, not with overwhelming fire, with coverage angles and blocked corridors, the way you redirect water by adjusting the shape of the container. Gret understood then. They were not trying to destroy his fleet. They were managing it, controlling the shape of the battle. He was inside a container, and the Warden was holding the walls. Saul found a direct channel to the Warden and opened it without clearing it through Gret. He asked the question that had been pressing against everything else since the sensors first lit up. "When did you build all of this?" Walsh answered without a pause. "The day your outer scouts crossed our detection threshold. We watched you for 31 years. We didn't build a fleet. We built a web, one that only activates when the right ship sends the right signal on the right key. No other source can generate it. No signal that is not ours. No shortcut." Saul looked at his data. 31 years of construction conducted in cold space and total silence. Not hidden behind military secrecy. Hidden in plain sight, in the gaps where nobody looked because nothing out there had ever looked alive. "How many of your people knew?" he asked. Walsh said, "Enough to build it, fewer than you would think." Saul looked at the formation around him, at the disabled ships, at the intact ones sitting motionless because there was nowhere to go, at the web that had been quietly assembled around an entire solar system, while the species inside it had never once mentioned it to anyone. "You were never afraid of us," he said. Walsh said, "We were afraid every single day." She paused. On the display, the Warden had still not moved from its original position. It had sat in the same coordinates through the entire engagement. "So we got to work," she said. Saul closed the channel. He set the data pad down on the console beside him. He looked at the display for a long time. Then he walked to Fleet Master Gret and told him it was over. The last Vron wing stopped resisting 40 minutes after the first platform fired. Not because they were destroyed, because they ran out of moves. Every formation shift had been anticipated. Every countermeasure had been answered. Every retreat corridor had closed ahead of them like a door pulling quietly shut. The fleet was intact, contained, and completely without options, and that math was visible to every ship commander in the formation at the same time. Walsh ordered the platforms to stand down. They powered back to passive state, not dormant, not offline, but still, watching. The engagement zone went from a field of live contacts to a field of cold ones in under 2 minutes, and the silence that followed felt heavier than the battle had. Gret's flagship had not been touched. Walsh had made sure of that. She had also made sure the disabled ships all retained life support. She had made sure the fleet still had a clear outbound corridor if they chose to use it. She had no interest in destroying 4,000 ships. She had never had any interest in that. She opened the channel. Gret looked different than he had an hour ago. Not injured, older. The kind of change that came from having a certainty that had held for an entire career removed from you completely and without drama. He looked at the warden on his display, then at Walsh. "You had all of this," he said, "the entire time, and you sent one ship." Walsh said, "We sent the right ship." He asked what the warden actually was. She told him plainly, the way you tell someone something when there is no longer any reason not to. The warden was a signal relay, the most capable one humanity had ever built. The platforms in the Sol system had been designed around a single activation condition, a specific signal from a specific source, broadcast on a specific encryption key that existed only on this vessel. No other ship could send it. No other configuration could replicate it. The key had never been transmitted, stored externally, or shared with any other system. Without the warden, everything in this system was invisible and inert, cold junk drifting in cold space. With the warden, it was the most complete defensive network any recorded species had ever constructed inside a single solar system. Gret said, "You made the whole thing unhackable by making it dependent on one source." Walsh said, "We made it ours, entirely and only ours. Nothing in this system responds to anything except this ship." She sent him the document then, not a surrender demand, not a punishment list, a proposal, 7 pages, formal language, clearly written over years and not the last few hours, terms for coexistence between Earth and the Vron Dominion, trade corridor agreements, mutual non-aggression boundaries, council arbitration structures for disputes, communication protocols for future contact. Reasonable in its structure, non-negotiable in its core. Gret read through it on his secondary screen while the channel stayed open. He did not speak while he read. Walsh waited. When he finished, he looked at her. "The platforms remain in position," he said. "Yes," Walsh said. "Permanently. For as long as the Dominion exists." He considered that. It was not a threat in the way he was used to threats. It was a condition, stated the same way you state that deep space is cold and time moves in one direction. He transmitted his acceptance code. The Vron fleet began its withdrawal sequence. Slow and orderly, the way a very large thing moves when it no longer has a destination to hurry toward. On the relay station, High Consul Drev had not left his post. He watched the fleet's withdrawal vector populate on the long-range display. Beside him, the Pelion Union delegate, the one who had sent the Insectan fire comparison image several hours ago, was very quiet. Another council delegate asked, in a careful voice, what exactly they had just witnessed. Drev thought about how to answer. He had watched the full engagement from the relay. He had seen the platforms activate. He had watched the warden coordinate without firing a single weapon. He had watched one of the largest military forces in the known galaxy contained and redirected by a ship that was, by every technical classification, a communications vessel. Humanity did not fight the Vron fleet, he said. They showed the Vron fleet what fighting humanity would actually mean. Nobody said anything for a moment. And they only needed one ship to do it. On the Warden, the crew was running post-engagement systems review. Real conversation had started, the kind that comes after something large and tense is finally over. Weiss was talking to the engineer beside him. Das was already plotting the return course. Fenn was running shutdown cycles on the array nodes one by one, careful and methodical. Walsh stood at the viewport. The Vron fleet was still visible at the edge of sensor range, growing smaller. Weiss came up beside her and asked, in a quiet and genuine way, whether she had been worried at any point through any of it. She thought about the question honestly. 31 years of planning. 31 years of construction reports and power budgets and activation tests run only in simulation, because the real test could only happen once. 31 years of watching a threat grow larger and choosing every single day to keep working instead of saying anything. Every single day for 31 years, she said. She watched the empty space where the fleet had been. But not today.